Tomorrow our nation will come together to celebrate the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. MLK Day is observed every third Monday in January, but his actual birth date was January 15th, 1929, which means that, were he still with us, Dr. King would be celebrating his 88th birthday today. I think it important to remember that were it not for an assassin's bullet that took his life at the age of 39, which parenthetically is the age that I will be turning a little later this year, if not for that bullet, Dr. King might very well still be here with us, fighting against injustice, tearing down systems of oppression, captivating us again and again with his prophetic words. He would be only 88 today. It is a stark reminder that his ministry, that the entire civil rights movement that he helped lead occurred only about 50 years ago. Now, as someone who was born after the civil rights movement, as one who has never known a world before MLK, I recognize that it is important for me to take time and remind myself that this world is still very much full of people who lived through that movement, who remember life before that movement. I have to remind myself that many among us lived in a segregated Jim Crow United States. And hearing from some folks at our Joys and Sorrows element this morning was obviously a great reminder of that. That particular species of racism seems so foreign and so distant to me. Yet I must recognize that for our nation, it is not. Perhaps this is part of the reason why I am still sometimes shocked by the explicit racism that still exists in this country, because I too quickly forget that we are not so far removed from a time when the laws of this nation literally made black men and black women second-class citizens. Dr. King was, of course, instrumental in leading black Americans to gaining basic civil rights decades ago, but ironically enough, 50 years after his death, it seems now that Dr. King's name is just as likely to be invoked by those who stand opposed to everything that Dr. King himself stood for. To put it a bit more bluntly, Dr. King's legacy has been whitewashed, co-opted by the very kinds of people that he opposed during his life, those who, in Dr. King's own words, are more devoted to order than justice. Over the past several years, I have had the disorienting, if not maddening, experience of reading articles, editorials, social media posts, listening to radio interviews, watching televised press conferences in which individuals have used MLK's name to co-sign their own beliefs in any number of social and political stances that are completely at odds with everything that Dr. King himself believed in and stood for. For example, after a recent police killing of an unarmed black individual, when crowds took to the streets and momentarily shut down traffic, I literally read tweets and Facebook posts and interviews, including interviews from mayors of large American cities, using Dr. King's name and saying, MLK would never take over a freeway. Over the past year, while Colin Kaepernick and other NFL players brought awareness to racial injustice in this country by kneeling in protest during the national anthem, I've actually heard sports commentators and coaches criticize the protests using MLK's name, suggesting that Dr. King would have never supported those kind of tactics, that kind of protest and spectacle. In the aftermath of our recent election, I have heard people again and again invoke Dr. King's name to suggest that now is a time for all Americans to come together, to unite, and to move forward together like Dr. King did. So here's what I think happened. Much of America, and especially white America, has plucked one line out of one speech out of the vast body of work produced during Dr. King's life, ignoring basically everything else he said, wrote, and did, and have used that one line from that one speech to create a fictitious character, a reversed mirror image of the real Dr. King. And the name of this mirror image, Bizarro World Dr. King, is invoked every time someone wants black people to calm down. So let's set the record straight this morning, both on Dr. King and the civil rights movement that he helped to lead. Make no mistake, Dr. King was an agitator. He reveled in making people feel uncomfortable, in drawing, in demanding attention from white Americans who refused to look at the ugly truth of racism in this nation until he forced them to open their eyes. He led marches, he protested, he did in fact shut down freeways and bridges. He caused maximum disruption. He was a proponent of civil disobedience, which is the nice and fancy way of saying he purposely broke the law over and over again. He was arrested 30 times over the course of 10 years, and he encouraged other people to break the law as well. In the Birmingham campaign, MLK sent hundreds of black children out to protest and be arrested. Those children were blasted by fire hoses, clubbed by police, attacked by police dogs for the entire world to see. So do you really think that someone who sent children out to be loaded up into police wagons en masse would think that kneeling before a football game was too radical? MLK's aims and tactics were so radical and so divisive that he earned several powerful enemies, as he should have. Look, if you don't have enemies, then it means you pose a threat to no one and to nothing. He was insulted and called out by many in the black community. His family was firebombed by white terrorists. He was viewed as an enemy of the state by the FBI, who surveilled him, sent him harassing letters, including an anonymously signed letter which encouraged him to kill himself. After his I Have a Dream speech, which, by the way, is actually one of his more militant speeches, but in most of our reproductions of that speech, we have conveniently edited out all of that language. But following that speech, the FBI drafted a memo calling King, quote, the most dangerous and effective Negro leader in the country. And of course, he was assassinated by his enemies before ever reaching the age of 40. So this image of a peace-loving, non-confrontational, non-controversial, universally beloved, popular unifier of the people, whose only dream in life was to see black and white children play together one day, that MLK is a fabrication. MLK was a radical prophet trying to tear down a system of injustice and oppression. He broke the law to do it and compelled others to break the law in order to cause maximum disruption and chaos, to force people to choose a side. He refused to allow people to stay on the sidelines or straddle a middle ground. He was the ultimate divider. This weekend already, many of us have probably heard one or two of the more famous, softer quotes from his I Have a Dream speech. This morning, I'd like to share with you 10 other MLK quotes that are often conveniently forgotten or ignored by those who want to believe that MLK was a conservative who believed in peace and order and that all lives matter. 1. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. 2. It is not enough for me to stand before you tonight and condemn riots. It would be morally irresponsible for me to do that without, at the same time, condemning the contingent, intolerable conditions that exist in our society. These conditions are the things that cause individuals to feel that they have no other alternative than to engage in violent rebellions to get attention. And I must say tonight that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice and humanity. Number 3, whites, it must frankly be said, are not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. It is an aspect of their sense of superiority that the white people of America believe they have so little to learn. The reality of substantial investment to assist Negroes in the 20th century, adjusting to Negro neighbors and genuine school integration, is still a nightmare for all too many white Americans. These are the deepest causes for contemporary abrasions between the races. Loose and easy language about equality, resonant resolutions about brotherhood, fall pleasantly on the ear. But for the Negro, there is a credibility gap he cannot overlook. He remembers that with each modest advance, the white population promptly raises the argument that the Negro has come far enough. Each step forward accents an ever-present tendency to backlash. 4, again, we have deluded ourselves into believing the myth that capitalism grew and prospered out of the Protestant ethic of hard work and sacrifice. The fact is that capitalism was built on the exploitation and suffering of black slaves and continues to thrive on the exploitation of the poor, both black and white, both here and abroad. 5, if America does not use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty and make it possible for all of God's children to have the basic necessities of life, she too will go to hell. 6, freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. 7, in the midst of blatant injustices inflicted upon the Negro, I have watched white churchmen stand on the sideline and mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities. In the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice, I have heard many ministers say, those are social issues with which the gospel has no real concern. And I have watched many churches commit themselves to a completely otherworldly religion, which makes a strange, unbiblical distinction between body and soul, between the sacred and the secular. 8, we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. 9, there will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. And 10, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. Just because MLK believed in nonviolence and advocated against the Vietnam War, that does not necessarily mean he was a peaceful man in the sense that many of us understand the word peace today. He was a disruptor, an agitator, a warrior who refused to allow white America to enjoy peace and quiet, harmony, and order so long as injustice existed. He was one of the most divisive Americans to ever live, because that's what it took to secure justice. We have never in this country achieved significant progress towards racial justice with words alone. Never. It has always required action, and Dr. King recognized that fact. When I was a child, I often wondered how I would have responded to the civil rights movement if I had been alive at the time. I don't believe that's a hypothetical question anymore. We are today in the midst of a justice movement, perhaps a collection of movements that is not too far removed from what Dr. King and his contemporaries started a few short years ago in the 1950s and 1960s. And I would today echo Dr. King's sentiments. There is no middle ground here. Love demands the choosing of a side. Years from now, perhaps your children or your grandchildren will ask you what side you took. They will ask you what you did in these years, and you will have to give them an answer. For those of us who have already made our choice, I will give you this morning 3 concrete things that you can do to help support the movement. One is learn. Whatever your racial background may be, I urge you in the spirit of Dr. King to start the journey by becoming educated on racial issues. Read the work of great Black thinkers, classic and contemporary: King, X, Du Bois, Baldwin, Douglas, West, Dyson, Hooks, Coates. Follow Black organizers on social media, people like Opal Tometi, Alicia Garza, DeRay McKesson. Watch 13th on Netflix. Read The New Jim Crow. Educate yourself, listen to and amplify Black voices. 2, give. Put your money where your mouth might be. Give money to Black-led organizations who are fighting for justice. There are, of course, the old standards, the NAACP, the SCLC, and the Urban League, but I'd also like to suggest looking at newer organizations as well, many run by Gen Xers and millennials. And I will put a list of such organizations on our Facebook page after the sermon. 3, act. Get involved. There are several opportunities on the local level. iCare is one of them. If you are not a Justice Ministry Network member, please see Lois Haft after the service and become one. Every iCare issue we are currently working on disproportionately affects Black lives and Black communities. And I encourage you to be on the lookout for more opportunities to get involved through this church in the very near future. We have got some projects cooking. Don't be afraid to call out racism in your conversations with your friends and your family. I know we are living in divisive times right now, and some are calling for unity and healing, and that's all well and good, so long as unity and healing are not code words for silence and assimilation. I encourage you, be not complicit to injustice by your silence. I'm not going to lie to you, this path that we're talking about is going to be difficult. But I am filled with an inexorable, if not irrational, hope. It is the same hope Dr. King referenced when he spoke these words inspired by Unitarian minister Theodore Parker. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I believe in the absolute truth of these words. When I look at history, when I look at the work of people like Dr. King, I see a relentless march toward greater and more perfect justice. It is a march that is only accelerating, moving so fast that I can barely keep up with it. And I do not believe for a second that it is going to let up in 2017. Let us all do our part to make it so. Blessed be.